My husband signed our divorce papers with a smile on his face. His mistress stood beside him, adjusting her white dress like she was already at her wedding. I was 7 months pregnant. I had $847 to my name. No job,
You need to
no
sign these
friends.
documents now.
My own mother had just testified against me in court.
I'm never giving up my
They
daughter.
thought they had won. They thought I was nothing. But here's what Marcus didn't know when he walked out that door. Here's what Victoria didn't know when she wore that $4,000 necklace he bought for her instead of me. They had no idea who my father really was, and neither did I. What happened next in that courtroom? Let's just say the color drained from their faces, and they never saw it coming. Stay with me until the end, because this story has a twist that will leave you speechless. If you love stories where the underdog wins, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever been underestimated? Let's talk about it. This story will show you that your darkest moment can become your greatest transformation, that everything they use against you can become the weapon that destroys them. Now let me tell you how a pregnant housewife brought down the man who tried to destroy her. My name is Claire Dawson Bennett. I was 32 years old when my world collapsed, and this is the story of how I rebuilt it from the ashes. It started on our 5th wedding anniversary. I had spent the entire day preparing. The apartment was spotless. Candles flickered on every surface. A bottle of expensive wine, the kind Marcus liked, was breathing on the counter. I had made his favorite dinner from scratch, a recipe that took 4 hours and left my feet aching and my back screaming. I was 7 months pregnant with our first child, a daughter. We were going to name her Emma. The apartment was small, a 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood that we could barely afford on Marcus's junior associate salary. But I had made it beautiful. Fresh flowers in a vase by the window because Marcus once said they made him happy. His favorite bourbon on the shelf for his evening drink. Everything arranged just the way he liked it. That was my life, making things perfect for Marcus Bennett. Anticipating his needs, dimming my own light so his could shine brighter. I didn't see it that way at the time, of course. I thought I was being a good wife, a supportive partner. I thought that was what love looked like. I was wrong. At 6:45, I put the finishing touches on dinner. Roasted chicken with herbs, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans, almondine. A chocolate cake for dessert, made from scratch because Marcus didn't like store-bought desserts. At 7 o'clock, I lit the candles and sat down to wait. At 7:30, I texted him, just checking if you're on your way. Heart emoji? Kiss emoji? At 8 o'clock, he replied, big case running late, almost done. Don't wait up. At 8:30, the chicken was getting dry. I covered it with foil and turned off the oven. At 9 o'clock, the candles had burned down to stubs. I replaced them with new ones from the drawer. At 9:30, I called him. It went straight to voicemail. At 10 o'clock, I started eating alone. The food tasted like cardboard. I couldn't finish more than a few bites. At 10:45, I was still sitting at that table, surrounded by cold food and dying candles, when I heard his key in the lock. Marcus walked in looking tired but not apologetic. He barely glanced at the table, at the candles, at the dinner I had spent hours preparing. He said hey and asked if everything was okay. He seemed distracted, already loosening his tie, already moving toward the bedroom. I reminded him it was our anniversary. He stopped walking, just for a second. Something flickered across his face, too fast for me to identify. Right, he said. Of course. Sorry, the Peterson case ran long. We can celebrate this weekend. He was exhausted. He walked past me without a kiss, without touching my belly to feel his daughter kick, without even looking at the meal I had made. I heard the shower turn on, heard him moving around the bedroom, heard him get into bed and turn off the light. I sat at that table for another hour, alone in the flickering candlelight, wondering when my husband had become a stranger. But here's the thing I didn't tell you. Earlier that day, while hanging up Marcus's jacket, I had found something. A receipt from Tiffany and Company. $4,200. A diamond pendant necklace. My heart had soared when I saw it. After 5 years of marriage, after giving up my career as a paralegal to support his dreams, after putting his needs before mine in every single way, he had remembered. He still loved me. He was going to surprise me with something beautiful. I had put the receipt back in his pocket. I didn't want to ruin the surprise. Sitting at that empty table, I understood. The surprise wasn't for me. I just couldn't admit it yet. 3 days later, I made the decision that would change everything. I decided to visit Marcus at work, to surprise him with lunch, to remind him that he had a wife who loved him, a baby on the way, a life worth coming home to. Looking back, I think some part of me already knew what I would find. Some part of me needed to see it with my own eyes before I could accept it. The offices of Preston and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. Marcus had worked there since passing the bar exam 5 years ago. He was being considered for junior partner, the goal he had worked toward since law school. The dream I had sacrificed my own career to support. I had been to the office many times before, back when Marcus used to show me off at company events, back when he was proud to introduce me as his wife. The receptionist, Linda, knew me by name. She smiled and waved me through without a second glance. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt longer than usual. My daughter kicked as we rose, like she could sense my nervousness. When I stepped off the elevator, Marcus's secretary was the first person I saw. Her name was Pamela. She was in her 50s, efficient and professional, always pleasant when I visited. Today she looked nervous. She stood up quickly when she saw me, her chair rolling back and hitting the wall. She said, "Mrs. Bennett." What a surprise. Mr. Bennett was in a meeting. Maybe I should wait in the lobby. I told her I would just peek in and drop off his lunch. I wouldn't interrupt. She moved to block my path. Her face was flushed. Her hands were shaking slightly. She said that really wasn't a good idea. The meeting was very important. Maybe I should come back later. But I was already walking, already moving toward his corner office, already close enough to see that the door was slightly open, already close enough to hear voices inside. 2 voices. 2. One was Marcus. The other was a woman, laughing. I pushed open the door. What I saw destroyed me. They were standing by the window, wrapped around each other like they had done this 1,000 times before. His hands were tangled in her dark hair. Her body was pressed against his in a way that left no doubt about their relationship. And around her neck, catching the light like a cruel joke, was a diamond pendant necklace. The Tiffany necklace. $4,200. The anniversary gift that was never meant for me. The lunch bag slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor with a soft thud. The sound made them turn. I will never forget the look on my husband's face in that moment. I expected guilt. I expected shame. I expected him to push her away and stammer out excuses. Instead, he looked annoyed, like I was an inconvenience, like I had interrupted something important. The woman smiled. It was the coldest expression I had ever seen on a human face. Beautiful and cruel, like a sculpture made of ice. She said, "Well, this was awkward. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was 7 months pregnant, standing in my husband's office, watching my entire world collapse." She was stunning, tall and slender, with perfect bone structure and designer clothes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She looked like she belonged in a magazine. I looked like I belonged in a maternity ward. Marcus sighed. He actually sighed like this was a burden for him. He said he was going to tell me this weekend. He wanted a divorce. He and Victoria were in love. Victoria. I learned her name from the way he said it, soft and reverent, the way he used to say my name. Victoria touched the necklace deliberately, making sure I saw it. Then she looked at my swollen belly with something like disgust. She said, maybe I should sit down. In my condition. The way she said condition made my stomach turn. Like my pregnancy was a disease. Like the child growing inside me was something shameful. But I didn't sit. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw things or make a scene. I turned around and walked out. Past Pamela, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Past Linda at the reception desk, who was suddenly very interested in her computer screen. Into the elevator, down 23 floors, through the marble lobby, onto the street. I made it 2 blocks before my legs gave out. I sat down on a bench in a small park, surrounded by strangers who had no idea that a woman's life had just ended, and I finally let myself cry. I cried for the future I thought I had, for the family I thought we were building. For the 5 years I had given to a man who was capable of looking at me with annoyance while his mistress wore the necklace I thought was mine. I cried until I had nothing left. And then I placed my hand on my belly and felt my daughter kick. She was still here. She was still mine. Whatever happened next, I had to survive for her. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped being Marcus Bennett's wife and started becoming someone else entirely, someone stronger, someone fiercer, someone who would burn his entire world to the ground. Marcus came home that night, but not for me. He came to pack. I was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked through the door, still wearing the same clothes from that morning. I had not eaten since the lunch I dropped on his office floor. I had not slept. I had sat in that chair for 6 hours, staring at nothing, trying to process what had happened. He did not look at me. He walked straight to the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the closet. I could hear him opening drawers, removing clothes, folding them with efficient precision, like he had been planning this for weeks. Like he had rehearsed every movement. He probably had. I finally found my voice. It came out rough and broken, like I had swallowed glass. I asked him how long had it been going on? He didn't stop packing. 8 months, he said casually, since Victoria transferred from the Boston office. He didn't plan for it to happen. It just did. She understood him in ways I never could. 8 months. Our anniversary was 5 years. He had been cheating for 8 months. Nearly 1/5 of our marriage had been a lie. I asked him what that meant. What did she understand that I didn't? He stopped packing then, turned to look at me for the first time since walking through the door. His expression was strange, something between pity and contempt. He walked toward me, slowly, like he was approaching something pathetic. Something beneath him. He said that was exactly the problem. The person I had become. When we met, I was interesting. I had a career, ambitions, opinions about things. Now I was just a pregnant housewife who waited for him to come home so I could ask about his day. I reminded him that I gave up my career for him. I supported him through law school debt. I worked double shifts at the law firm so he could study for the bar exam. I did everything he asked me to do. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. Exactly, he said. I gave things up. I stopped fighting for myself. I became boring, predictable. Victoria challenged him. Victoria was his intellectual equal. Victoria understood ambition. He zipped his suitcase and looked around the apartment one final time, like he was cataloging everything he was leaving behind. His lawyer would contact me, he said. He would be generous because he was not a monster. I would get some child support, enough to get by. But the apartment was in his name. His career was his. His future was his. I had contributed nothing financially. and I should remember that when the divorce papers came. I asked about our daughter, about the baby growing inside me, his baby. He paused at the door. For just a moment, something human flickered across his face, something that might have been regret. They would work out custody later, he said. Joint arrangement, probably. He wasn't trying to cut me out completely. He just needed to start his new life. Then he walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. And I was alone. I sat in that apartment for 3 more hours, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor, trying to understand who I was now that I wasn't Marcus Bennett's wife. For 5 years, that had been my identity. His wife, his support system, his cheerleader. I had molded myself into exactly what he wanted, convinced that was what love required. Now, I was nothing. A pregnant woman in an apartment I couldn't afford, wearing a ring that no longer meant anything. At midnight, I finally got up from that chair. I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen from crying. My face was puffy from pregnancy. My hair was tangled. I looked exhausted, defeated. I placed my hand on my belly. It's going to be okay, I told my daughter. I don't know how yet, but it's going to be okay. I didn't believe it, but I said it anyway, because sometimes that's how survival works. You say the things you need to become true, and then you figure out how to make them real. The next morning, I discovered that Marcus's cruelty had only just begun. I went to the bank first thing. We had a joint checking account, a joint savings account, and a shared credit card. I needed money to survive. I needed to find a new place to live, buy things for the baby, maybe hire a lawyer. The teller was a young woman with a kind face and a name tag that said Jennifer. She typed my information into her computer and frowned. She told me she was sorry. The accounts had been frozen, per Mr. Bennett's request. I explained that I was Mrs. Bennett, dumped. Those were my accounts, too. I had every right to access them. She apologized again. There was nothing she could do. I would need to work it out with my husband. I tried the credit card next at a pharmacy across the street. I needed prenatal vitamins. The card was declined. I called the credit card company from a payphone. The account had been closed, per Mr. Bennett's request. I called our health insurance company. My coverage had been terminated, effective immediately. Per Mr. Bennett's request, I was 7 months pregnant. I had no bank account, no credit, no health insurance, and no home. I walked back to the apartment in a daze, trying to calculate how long I could survive. I had a personal savings account that my grandmother had started when I was born, money I had never touched because I was saving it for emergencies. I checked the balance at an ATM, $847. That was everything I had in the world. The phone calls started that afternoon. The first was from Hannah, my best friend since freshman year of college. We had been roommates. We had been bridesmaids at each other's weddings. She knew me better than anyone except Marcus. She was crying before I even said hello. She asked if it was true, if what Marcus was telling everyone was really what happened. I asked her what Marcus was telling everyone. She said he had screenshots, photos, evidence that I had been having an affair for months, that the baby might not even be his, that I was the one who destroyed the marriage. My blood went cold. I asked her what she was talking about, what screenshots, what photos. She said Marcus had shown her everything, text between me and some man, photos of us together, a whole timeline of my supposed affair. I told her none of it was true. Marcus was the one cheating. I caught him with his mistress yesterday, in his office, right in front of me. Long pause on the line. Hannah said Marcus told her I would say exactly that. He said I would try to turn the story around, make myself the victim. He seemed so sincere, so hurt. She didn't know what to believe anymore. I begged her to believe me. We had known each other for 15 years. She knew who I was. She knew I would never cheat. She knew I loved Marcus. Another pause. Longer this time. She said she needed time to think. She would call me later. She didn't call later. She didn't call the next day. She didn't call at all. Over the next 3 days, I received similar calls from 6 other friends. Every single one had seen the evidence Marcus had prepared. Screenshots of text messages I never sent, photos of me with a man I had never met. A complete fabrication designed to destroy my reputation. Victoria. It had to be Victoria. She was a senior associate at a top law firm. She knew how to build a case. She knew how to manufacture evidence. She had spent 8 months preparing for this moment, making sure that when Marcus finally left me, I would have nothing and no one. By the end of the week, I had lost everything. My money was frozen. My credit was destroyed. My health insurance was canceled. My friends had abandoned me. My reputation was in ruins. And in 2 months, I was going to have a baby that I had no way to support. I called the one person I had left, the one person who had to believe me no matter what. My mother, Diane Dawson, answered on the third ring. Her voice was warm and worried before I even said a word. She asked what was wrong. She always knew. I told her everything. Marcus, Victoria, the affair, the fabricated evidence, the frozen accounts, the canceled insurance, the friends who wouldn't believe me. Everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said what she always said. Come home, baby. I don't have much, but I have a couch. We'll figure it out together. My mother lived in a small apartment in Columbus, Ohio. She worked as a housekeeper at a hotel, making barely enough to pay her own bills. She had nothing to offer me except love and a place to sleep. I almost said yes. I almost surrendered. I almost packed my bags and ran back to Ohio like a child running to her mother's arms. But something stopped me. A memory, 1,000 memories. My mother crying over bills. My mother working double shifts. My mother always struggling, always running, always accepting whatever crumbs life offered her. I had spent my entire childhood watching her be beaten down by circumstances. I had sworn I would be different. I would be stronger. I would never let anyone make me feel small, and here I was, about to do exactly what she would do. Run, hide, accept defeat. No. I told her I wasn't running. If I ran now, I would never stop. I was going to stay in Chicago. I was going to fight. She asked what I was going to fight with. I didn't have anything. I touched my belly, feeling my daughter move inside me. I told her I had enough. I didn't believe it, but I said it anyway. 3 weeks after Marcus walked out, I found myself sitting in the waiting room of the Legal Aid Society of Chicago. The room was exactly what you would expect from a place that served people who had nothing. Fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered overhead. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, uncomfortable by design. A water cooler in the corner that made strange gurgling sounds. Faded posters on the walls with messages about knowing your rights. The room was full of people. Single mothers with crying babies. Elderly men clutching crumpled documents. Women with bruises they tried to hide under long sleeves. Everyone looking exhausted. Everyone looking defeated. Everyone waiting for someone to tell them they still had options. I was 8 months pregnant now. The baby was due in 4 weeks. I had been living in a women's shelter on the west side, sharing a room with 2 other women and their children. I had not slept more than a few hours a night since Marcus left. I had lost 15 pounds because I couldn't keep food down. But I was still here, still fighting. That was all I had left. I had found the Legal Aid Society through a flyer at the shelter. Free legal help for people who couldn't afford attorneys. The waiting list was long. I had to arrive at 6 in the morning just to get a number. After 4 hours of waiting, they finally called my name. Robert Callahan was 55 years old, wearing a suit that had been nice about a decade ago. His office was tiny, barely bigger than a closet, overflowing with files and papers and empty coffee cups. He had gray hair that needed cutting and tired eyes that had seen every sad story the world had to offer. He gestured for me to sit, asked me to tell him my situation. Most people, I think, would have told him a sob story. They would have cried and begged and explained how unfair everything was. They would have thrown themselves on his mercy and hoped for the best. I did not do that. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. It was organized, tabbed, color-coded, annotated with sticky notes in 3 different colors. 3 years as a paralegal had taught me how to build a case, how to document evidence, how to present information clearly and compellingly. Just because I had given up my career didn't mean I had forgotten how to do it. I told Robert I worked as a paralegal for 3 years before I got married. I knew how to keep records. His eyebrows rose slightly. He took the folder and began flipping through it. I explained what I had compiled. Bank statements proving I contributed to household expenses for the first 2 years of our marriage, before Marcus asked me to quit my job and focus on supporting his career. Records showing I paid off $40,000 of his law school debt using an inheritance from my grandmother. Emails from Marcus explicitly discussing his plan to keep all the marital assets. Text messages between Marcus and Victoria, accidentally forwarded to his regular phone, revealing their affair and their scheme to leave me with nothing. Robert stopped flipping. He looked at the text messages carefully. I continued. I was also 8 months pregnant. My husband had frozen all joint accounts, canceled my credit cards, and terminated my health insurance while I was carrying his child. He had fabricated evidence of an affair to destroy my reputation with our friends. I had documentation of everything. Robert set down the folder. He looked at me differently now, not with pity, with something closer to respect. He said most people who came through that door had nothing. They had been beaten down for so long they didn't even know what to fight for anymore. I was different. I told him I didn't have money, but I had a brain, and I was not going to let Marcus take my daughter. He nodded slowly. Then he smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen in 3 weeks. He said we should get to work. Over the next 3 days, Robert and I prepared our case. He filed emergency motions while I organized evidence. He made phone calls while I wrote summaries. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and determination. Robert explained the situation to me in blunt terms. Marcus had money and connections. He had hired Stephen Wright, one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in Chicago. Stephen was known for being ruthless, for burying opposing parties in paperwork and motions until they gave up out of exhaustion. We didn't have those resources. What we had was documentation, evidence, the truth. Sometimes, Robert said, that was enough. The emergency hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I barely slept the night before. I lay on my cot at the shelter, staring at the ceiling, running through everything that could go wrong. Marcus's lawyer would attack my credibility. He would present the fabricated evidence of my affair. He would paint me as a gold digger, a cheater, an unfit mother. I had to be ready for all of it. At 6 in the morning, I put on the only professional outfit I owned, a simple navy blue dress that still fit over my pregnant belly. Flat shoes, because I couldn't manage heels anymore. My hair pulled back neatly, minimal makeup. I looked at myself in the shelter's cracked bathroom mirror. I looked tired. I looked scared, but I also looked determined. I told my reflection that we were going to win. I didn't believe it, but I said it anyway. The courthouse was intimidating. Marble floors, high ceilings, important-looking people in expensive suits walking past like they owned the place. Robert met me at the entrance. He looked almost as tired as I did. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later. New BMW, parked in the reserved section. $3,000 suit, Italian leather shoes, diamond cufflinks. He looked like success personified. Victoria was with him, of course. She was wearing white again, a pristine white dress and white heels and a pearl necklace, like she was already celebrating her victory, like this hearing was just a formality before she took her place as the new Mrs. Bennet. Behind them came Stephen Wright, tall and thin, with a sharp face and cold eyes. He carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. Marcus saw me and whispered something to Victoria. They both laughed. Let them laugh, I thought. They had no idea what was coming. The hearing began at 9 o'clock. The judge was a woman in her early 60s named Judge Patricia Hendricks. She had sharp eyes and silver hair and a no-nonsense expression that gave me hope. Stephen Wright stood first. His voice was smooth and confident, dripping with practiced concern. He addressed the court. His client had been extraordinarily generous throughout this difficult process. Mrs. Bennet had contributed nothing to the marriage financially. She was unemployed, uneducated beyond high school, and had been living entirely off Mr. Bennet's success for years. Mr. Bennet was willing to provide reasonable temporary support while they worked through the divorce, but he wanted the court to understand the true nature of this marriage. Robert stood before. Stephen could continue. He respectfully disagreed with opposing counsel's characterization. He had extensive documentation proving Mrs. Bennet's contributions to the marriage. He approached the judge's bench and placed our folder in front of her. He explained what was inside. Bank statements showing Mrs. Bennet contributed 50% of household expenses for the first 2 years of the marriage. Records proving she paid off $40,000 of Mr. Bennet's law school debt using her own inheritance. Documentation of her career, sacrifice at Mr. Bennet's explicit request to support his advancement. Judge Hendricks began reading through the documents. Robert continued. Mrs. Bennet was 8 months pregnant. Her husband had frozen all joint accounts, canceled her credit cards, and terminated her health insurance while she was carrying his child. He would submit that these actions constituted financial abuse and should be considered when determining temporary support. Stephen Wright tried to object. This was an emergency hearing about asset access, not a character trial. Judge Hendricks held up her hand. She would decide what was relevant. She spent several minutes reading through our documentation. Her expression grew darker with each page. Finally, she looked up. She addressed Marcus directly. Did he cancel his pregnant wife's health insurance? Stephen Wright answered for him. That was a paperwork error that was being corrected. Judge Hendricks' eyes narrowed. She asked if Mr. Bennet also accidentally froze all joint accounts and canceled all credit cards. Stephen Wright said those were standard procedures during divorce proceedings to protect marital assets. Judge Hendricks turned to Robert. Did Mrs. Bennet have any other source of income or support? Robert explained I was living in a women's shelter. I had $847 to my name. I was due to give birth in 4 weeks. Judge Hendricks was silent for a long moment. Then she delivered her ruling. Accounts unfrozen, she said. Mrs. Bennet was entitled to full access to all marital assets during the divorce proceedings. Health insurance restored immediately. Mr. Bennet would ensure coverage was reinstated within 24 hours. Temporary spousal support of $2,500 per month, effective immediately. And one more thing. She looked directly at Marcus when she said it. If she saw any further evidence of financial manipulation or abuse, there would be consequences. Severe consequences. Did Mr. Bennet understand? Marcus nodded, his face red with anger or embarrassment or both. Court was adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Robert shook my hand. He said I did well. We won this round. I felt tears spring to my eyes. I had won, Against all the money and power and connections that Marcus had, I had won. That night, back at the shelter, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe I could survive this. Maybe I could build a life for myself and my daughter. Maybe Marcus Bennett would not destroy me after all. I placed my hand on my belly. "We did it, baby," I whispered, "one battle at a time." I should have known it was too easy. I should have known Marcus and Victoria wouldn't accept defeat that gracefully. 2 days later, I learned exactly how far they were willing to go. The envelope arrived by courier on Thursday morning. I was eating breakfast at the shelter, trying to force down some oatmeal, when one of the staff members called my name. Someone had delivered something for me. The envelope was thick and official-looking. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a legal document, a motion filed by Marcus Bennett. He was seeking full custody of our unborn child. The motion claimed I was mentally unstable, a danger to my unborn daughter, a woman with a history of psychological problems that made me unfit for motherhood. Attached was a psychiatric evaluation, signed by a doctor named Harold Crane, dated 1 week ago. The evaluation stated that during an examination, I had exhibited signs of severe prenatal psychosis, that I had expressed thoughts of harming myself and my baby, that I required immediate psychiatric intervention and should not be allowed unsupervised access to a child. I read the words 3 times, trying to understand. I had never met Dr. Harold Crane. I had never been examined by any psychiatrist. The evaluation was a complete fabrication, but there it was, official and signed and notarized, claiming I was crazy. Marcus was filing for emergency custody the moment our baby was born. He wanted a court order to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation. He wanted to take my daughter before I could even hold her. I called Robert immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. I asked him how this was possible. I had never seen this doctor. The evaluation was fake. Robert's voice was grim. He had done some research after I called. Dr. Harold Crane was Victoria Ashford's uncle, her mother's brother. He had signed a fraudulent evaluation without ever meeting me. I asked what we could do, how we could prove it was fake. Robert explained the problem. The evaluation would eventually be proven false. We could request an independent psychiatric examination that would contradict Crane's findings, but that would take time. Weeks, maybe months. The emergency motion would proceed before then. Marcus's lawyers would argue that erring on the side of caution was appropriate when a child's safety was at stake. A judge might grant temporary custody to Marcus while the evaluation was being verified. They were trying to take my baby, trying to steal her from me the moment she was born, using a fabricated document from a corrupt doctor. I felt something break inside me. Not hope, something else, some final barrier that had been holding back the darkest parts of my fear. I asked Robert what I should do. He told me to stay calm, to document everything, to trust the process, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. He wasn't sure we could beat this, not with their resources, not with their willingness to lie and cheat and manufacture evidence. I hung up the phone and sat in the shelter's common room, surrounded by other broken women, and felt the walls closing in. That night, the stress overwhelmed my body. The contractions started around midnight. Sharp and sudden, nothing like the practice contractions I had been feeling for weeks. These were real. These were serious. I was only 8 months pregnant. I had 4 weeks left. This was not supposed to happen yet. I woke up Ruth, the woman in the cot next to mine. She took one look at my face and called for help. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. They loaded me onto a stretcher. While asking questions I could barely answer. How far along was I? How close were the contractions? Did I have any medical conditions? I was alone. Completely alone. No husband, no friends. My mother was 600 miles away and couldn't afford a plane ticket. I was about to have my baby in the back of an ambulance, surrounded by strangers, with a fabricated psychiatric evaluation hanging over my head like a death sentence. The delivery was difficult. Emma was born at 3:47 in the morning, 4 weeks early, after 6 hours of labor. She weighed 5 pounds 4 ounces. She was small but healthy. A fighter, the nurses said, like her mother. They placed her in my arms, this tiny, perfect creature, and I cried. Not from pain, not from fear, from something bigger than both, from love so overwhelming, it felt like it might destroy me. I looked at my daughter's face. Her eyes were closed, her tiny fists clenched, her mouth making small sucking motions. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I promised her I would protect her, no matter what it cost, no matter who I had to fight, no matter what I had to become. I would burn the entire world down before I let anyone take her from me. 6 hours later, the wolves arrived at my door. I was dozing in my hospital bed, Emma sleeping in a bassinet beside me, when a knock woke me. A woman entered. She was in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. She introduced herself as Greta Hoffman. She was a social worker assigned to the maternity ward. I felt my heart start pounding. Social worker. That meant someone had reported something. That meant the system was getting involved. Greta closed the door behind her. Through the window, I could see the hallway. Marcus was standing there. His lawyer was beside him. They were holding papers. Greta spoke quietly, like she didn't want anyone outside to hear. She told me my husband was there with a court order. He was demanding access to the child and requesting an evaluation of my fitness as a mother. I pulled Emma closer to my chest. I told her no, he couldn't do this. I had just given birth. Greta held up her hand. She asked me to let her finish. She said she had read the court order carefully. She had also been watching me for the last 6 hours through labor and delivery and those first precious moments with my daughter. She had been doing this job for 20 years. She knew what abuse looked like. She knew what a mother protecting her child looked like. And she knew which one I was. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. The court order had irregularities, she continued. The psychiatric evaluation was signed by a doctor with a history of malpractice complaints. It was dated 1 week ago, but claimed to document an examination that never appeared in any medical records. Those were grounds for delay. I asked how long she could delay it. 72 hours. That was the maximum she could justify legally, but I needed to use that time. Whatever I was going to do, I needed to do it now. She glanced toward the hallway where Marcus was checking his watch impatiently. That man didn't want his daughter, she said. He wanted to hurt me. She had seen 100 men like him in her career. They used children as weapons. They used the system to extend their control. She looked back at me with fierce determination in her eyes. Don't let him win. After she left, I lay in that hospital bed, holding my newborn daughter, trying to think through the fog of exhaustion and pain and fear. 72 hours, 3 days, that was all the time I had. I had just given birth. I was exhausted beyond words. I had no money, no resources, no support system, and Marcus Bennett, with his expensive lawyers and fabricated evidence and connected mistress, was coming for my baby. I looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully against my chest, so small, so innocent, completely unaware that her life had already become a battleground. I whispered to her that I was going to fix this. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to find a way. Then I reached for my phone and started making calls. I did not sleep for the next 3 days. From my hospital bed, with Emma beside me, I worked. I made calls. I sent emails. I reached into every corner of my past and pulled out every resource I could find. Maybe you know what that feels like. That moment when you're backed into a corner with no obvious escape, and something inside you catches fire. When desperation transforms into determination, when the person you used to be burns away and someone new rises from the ashes. That was what happened to me in that hospital room. The first call I made was to Janet, a paralegal I had worked with before my marriage. We had been close once before I let my whole world shrink down to Marcus Bennett. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice surprised. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I told her I needed help. I needed information on Victoria Ashford, anything she could find. Janet hesitated. She said she had heard rumors about what happened, about Marcus leaving me, about the affair I supposedly had. She wasn't sure what to believe. I told her the truth, all of it. The real affair between Marcus and Victoria, the fabricated evidence of the frozen accounts, the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, the custody motion, everything. When I finished, Janet was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she would see what she could find. She called back 4 hours later. Victoria Ashford had been cut off from her family 5 years ago, Janet reported. The Ashfords were old money from Boston, very old money, the kind that usually kept their scandals quiet and their dirty laundry hidden. But something had happened that was bad enough for them to make a public statement. The family had released a comment saying Victoria no longer represented the Ashford family's values. I asked what she had done to warrant that. Janet said nobody knew for sure. The family had buried whatever happened, but she had a contact at the Boston Globe, a journalist who covered high society scandals. Maybe that reporter would know something. I gave her my phone number and waited. 2 hours later, my phone rang. A woman's voice, professional but curious. She introduced herself as Meredith Cole. Janet had passed along my number. She understood I was asking about Victoria Ashford. I confirmed that was correct. I explained that Victoria was destroying my life. I needed to understand why she had been cut off from her family. Long pause on the line. Off the record? Meredith said finally. Victoria Ashford had embezzled $1.8 million from her family's charitable foundation, money that was supposed to help sick children. She had been siphoning it off for 2 years before anyone noticed. My grip tightened on the phone. I asked why she was never prosecuted. Old money protects itself, Meredith explained. The Ashfords paid back the stolen funds quietly. They issued their public statement. They cut Victoria off completely, but they made sure there was never any criminal investigation. She paused, but here was the interesting part. She had heard Victoria was now working at a prestigious law firm in Chicago. If she was in a position with fiduciary access, she might be positioning herself to do it again. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Victoria had targeted Marcus specifically. She had researched him, identified his vulnerabilities, seduced him deliberately. Marcus was about to become junior partner at Preston and Associates. Junior partners had access to client trust accounts worth tens of millions of dollars. Victoria wasn't in love with my husband. She was using him. Marcus was just another mark in her long con. I thanked Meredith and hung up. I had information now, but information wasn't proof, and without proof, I had nothing I could use in court. That was when I decided to do something crazy, something desperate, something that probably shouldn't have worked. I called Preston and Associates directly and asked to speak with Richard Preston, the founding partner. The receptionist laughed. She told me politely that Mr. Preston didn't take unsolicited calls. I told her to deliver a message. Tell him it was about Victoria Ashford. Tell him I had information about what she did to his daughter, Melissa. Silence on the line. I held my breath. I didn't actually know what had happened between Victoria and Richard Preston's daughter. During my research, I had discovered that Melissa Preston attended the same college as Victoria around the same time. I had seen references to Melissa having a breakdown and taking a leave of absence from school. I put two and two together and gambled. Sometimes desperation makes you smart. After a long pause, the receptionist came back on the line. Mr. Preston would see me, tomorrow afternoon, at the hospital. I hung up and looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. Mommy is playing chess now, I whispered, and Mommy is going to win. Richard Preston arrived at the hospital the next day at exactly 2 o'clock. He came alone, which surprised me. No assistant, no secretary, no witnesses to whatever was about to happen. He was 62 years old with silver hair and impeccable posture. His suit probably cost more than a year of my rent. His watch probably cost more than my car had cost, but it was his eyes that struck me. Sharp, calculating. The eyes of a man who had built an empire by being smarter and harder than everyone else. He stood in my doorway, looking at me and Emma with an expression I couldn't read. He said I had 5 minutes. I didn't waste them. I told him Victoria Ashford was cut off from her family 5 years ago for embezzling $1.8 million from their charitable foundation. She targeted my husband specifically because he was about to become junior partner at Preston's firm. Once Marcus had access to client trust accounts, Victoria was going to steal from them and disappear. Marcus would take the fall, and Preston and Associates' reputation would be destroyed. Richard's expression didn't change. He said that was speculation. I agreed. I didn't have proof yet, but he had something I didn't have. He had access to his own firm's systems. He could monitor Victoria's activity. He could catch her in the act. He asked why he would help me. I played my only card, because of Melissa. Something shifted in his face, a crack in the impenetrable facade. I continued, Victoria and Melissa were college roommates. When Melissa discovered Victoria cheating on an exam, Victoria retaliated. She spread rumors that Melissa was sleeping with professors for grades. She destroyed Melissa's reputation systematically and deliberately. Melissa had a complete breakdown. She tried to take her own life. Richard's voice was ice. He asked how I knew that. I told him I was a paralegal. I knew how to research, but more importantly, I knew that he had been waiting for a chance to destroy Victoria for years. He couldn't prove what she did to Melissa, but embezzlement from client trust accounts? That he could prove, and that would send her to prison. Long silence. Richard studied me with new eyes, like he was reassessing everything he thought he knew. He said, I should have been a lawyer. I told him I gave up that dream for Marcus, and look where it got me. He straightened his jacket and moved toward the door. He would look into it, he said. If I was right, and he believed I was, they would handle this together. But he wanted me to understand something. He wasn't doing this for me. He was doing it for his daughter. I told him I didn't care why he was doing it. I just needed Victoria and Marcus to burn. He almost smiled. On that, he said, we agreed. After he left, I looked at the clock. 32 hours left of my 72 hours. The trap was being set. But I still needed to survive the custody hearing. I picked up my phone and started calling everyone who might testify to the truth about Marcus Bennett. One by one, I assembled my army. 2 weeks after Emma was born, I was living in a women's shelter on the south side with my daughter. The shelter was crowded and noisy and smelled like industrial cleaner. I shared a room with 2 other women and their children. Privacy was non-existent. The beds were hard, the food was bland, but Emma and I were safe, and safe was all that mattered. Robert Callahan visited me every few days with updates on the custody case. Richard Preston's IT team had been monitoring Victoria's computer activity at the firm. She had already accessed the client trust account system multiple times, probing the security, testing her access levels. Richard had accelerated Marcus's promotion to junior partner. Victoria thought she had won. She thought the hard part was over. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. Meanwhile, I was preparing for the custody hearing scheduled for the following Monday. Over the past 2 weeks, I had built a case that I hoped would destroy Marcus's credibility forever. I had tracked down witnesses who had seen the truth, ordinary people, not powerful or connected, but people who knew what they had seen and were willing to say it under oath. First was Terrence, the Uber driver. He had driven Marcus and Victoria to hotels at least a dozen times over the past 8 months. He remembered them clearly because Victoria was rude to him and Marcus overtipped out of embarrassment. Terrence was happy to testify. Next was Charlotte, a saleswoman at Tiffany & Company. She had sold Marcus the diamond necklace. She remembered him bragging that it was for his future wife, not his current wife. So, his future wife. She thought it was sleazy at the time. She remembered every word. Then there was Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who lived in our apartment building. She spent most of her time in the lobby, watching people come and go. She had overheard Victoria telling Marcus, "Once we get the partnership money, we are gone." Mrs. Patterson didn't like Victoria, said the woman had mean eyes. She was eager to testify. Finally, I had reached out to Patricia Bennett, Marcus's estranged older sister. Patricia and Marcus hadn't spoken in 5 years. When their mother was dying of cancer, Marcus had manipulated the old woman into changing her will. He got the house, the savings, everything. Patricia got nothing. When I called and explained who I was and what Marcus had done to me, Patricia laughed, a bitter, knowing laugh. "Of course he did," she said. That was exactly who Marcus was. He had been manipulating people his whole life, finding their weaknesses and exploiting them. She had watched him do it since they were children. I asked if she would testify against him. She said she would do anything to see her brother get what he deserved. By Friday, I had 11 witnesses ready to take the stand. Not lawyers or executives or important people, just ordinary humans who had seen Marcus Bennett for what he really was. Robert called me that evening, impressed. He asked how I had done this. How had I assembled this coalition in 2 weeks while caring for a newborn and living in a shelter? I told him I stopped being the woman Marcus had trained me to be. I became the woman I was always supposed to be. That night, lying on my cot with Emma sleeping beside me, I allowed myself to believe we might win. The custody hearing was in 3 days. Richard's trap for Victoria was ready to spring. The evidence against Marcus was overwhelming. I whispered to my daughter that it was almost over. Soon we would be safe. Soon we would be free. I should have known better. At 3 o'clock on Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Robert. His voice was shaking in a way I had never heard before. He told me Marcus had filed a new motion, emergency hearing, 6 hours from now. I sat up in my cot, my heart pounding. I asked how that was possible. The hearing was scheduled for Monday. Robert explained that Marcus had found a new judge, Judge Morrison, someone he had connections with through the firm, someone willing to move the schedule up. But that wasn't the worst part. Marcus had a new witness. I asked who. Long pause on the line. My mother. The words didn't make sense at first. My mother, Diane Dawson, the woman who had raised me alone, the woman who had sacrificed everything for me, the woman who was the only person in the world who loved me unconditionally. I told Robert that was impossible. My mother would never testify against me. He said he was sorry. He had spoken to her directly. She confirmed everything. She had signed an affidavit stating I had been mentally unstable since childhood, that I was unfit to be a mother, that she feared for Emma's safety. The phone slipped from my fingers. Ruth, the woman in the cot next to mine, woke up at the sound. She asked if everything was okay. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. My own mother had betrayed me. I picked up the phone with numb fingers. Robert told me the hearing was at 9 a.m. We had 6 hours. I hung up without saying goodbye. Then I sat in the darkness of that shelter, holding my sleeping daughter, trying to understand how my own mother could sell me out. At 4 in the morning, I called her. Diane answered on the first ring, like she had been waiting by the phone, hoping I would call. I asked her one question. Why? She started crying immediately, begging me to understand, begging me to forgive her. I demanded an explanation. She said Marcus had found out something about her past, something I didn't know, something she had been hiding for over 30 years. I asked what he had found. Long silence. Then she told me. When I was 3 years old, we were starving. She couldn't find work. No one would hire a single mother with no education, no references, no support system. So she started stealing. Small things at first. Food from grocery stores, clothes from department stores, just enough to survive. Then she got bolder, started taking things from houses, small valuables she could pawn for cash. She got caught eventually, arrested, convicted of burglary. She served 3 months in county jail while I stayed with a foster family. After she got out, she changed our names, moved to Ohio, started over completely. No one knew about her record, not even me. But Marcus had found out. Somehow, somewhere, he had dug up records that were supposed to be sealed and buried forever. He threatened to expose her, to have her sent back to prison for parole violations, to make sure she never saw me or Emma again. She said she was so sorry. She was just trying to protect me. She had always just been trying to protect me. I felt something twist inside me. Anger, betrayal, and underneath it all, a terrible understanding. I asked if there was more, if there was anything else she had been hiding. Long pause. She said Marcus also threatened to tell me the truth about my father. The real truth, not the story she had told me my whole life. I asked what truth? What about my father? She had always told me he abandoned us before I was born, that he didn't want us. She said she couldn't explain over the phone. She was sorry. She had made so many mistakes. She had been trying to protect me, but she just made everything worse. I hung up. I had 5 hours until the hearing. My mother had betrayed me. And somewhere in that betrayal was a secret about my father that had been hidden for 32 years. I didn't have time to process any of it. I didn't have time to feel hurt or confused or angry. I had one job: survive the next 6 hours, protect my daughter. Everything else could wait. I started making calls. I did not have time to fall apart. 5 hours until the hearing. My mother had betrayed me. Marcus had a compromised judge. The trap for Victoria couldn't spring yet because timing it wrong would make everything look like retaliation. I had never felt more alone in my life, but I had Emma. And I had the witnesses I had spent 2 weeks assembling, and I had something Marcus had underestimated from the beginning. I had myself. At 4:30 in the morning, I started calling everyone on my list. Terrence, the Uber driver. I woke him up and explained the situation. Emergency hearing, 9 a.m. Could he be there? He said hell yes he could be there. He was tired of rich people, thinking they could treat everyone like garbage. He would see me at the courthouse. Charlotte from Tiffany and Company. She was already awake, getting ready for an early shift. When I explained what was happening, she agreed immediately. She had never liked Marcus. Something about his smile seemed wrong. She would testify. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor. She was an early riser. She listened to my explanation and said she would be there with bells on. That young man needed to learn some manners, and she would be happy to help teach him. Patricia Bennett, Marcus's sister. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert. She asked what he had done now. I told her about the emergency hearing, about my mother's betrayal, about the compromised judge. She was silent for a moment. Then she said she always knew Marcus would self-destruct eventually. She just didn't think she'd get front row seats to watch it happen. She would be there. She had been waiting 5 years for a chance to tell a judge,